Sir Jackie Stewart, thanks for having us. I would like to start from the beginning, your early years. How did you start? How your passion started?
Well, I was not a racing driver in my early years. I was in tir pigeon, trap shooting. I shot from the age of 14 until I was 24. I shot for Scotland and then for Great Britain, so I went around the world shooting. So that was my big sport, and it played a big part when I became a racing driver. I got married when I was 24, and it becomes too expensive to have a wife and a sport that is not professional financially. So I had to retire as a shooting man to being a racing man. I was a mechanic in a garage in Scotland. My father owned the garage, and I was doing preparations for a very young gentleman who was very rich. The family would not allow him to race, but allowed him to have nice cars and high performance cars. So he said, if you would like to do a race, let's do a race. So I did one race, I finished second. And he said, well, you should do another race. And then I finished first. And it just took off. It was like a rocket ship. To begin with, only in Scotland, then in the United Kingdom. And when I went down south, I was doing quite well in GT touring car racing. And Ken Tyrrell spotted me. And that was the beginning of my real professional motor racing.
How was Ken Tyrrell?
Ken Tyrrell was a remarkable man. He could handle any type of people, whether they be multimillionaires, whether they be common people, whether they be engineers and mechanics. He had a very good connection with people, a very good man, and I learned a lot from him. In Formula 3 to begin with, I won the Monaco Formula 3 race, my first time abroad, driving, which was a big deal because in those days when the Formula 3 racing driver won the Grand Prix of Formula 3 in Monaco, they sat in the dinner, black tie dinner, next to Princess Grace. Anyway, I won most of the Formula 3 championships and won the British and the European Championship of Formula 3, and then was spotted by BRM, by Lotus and by Cooper. I could have driven for any of them, but I chose BRM because I thought Graham Hill would be a good man for me to study. Jim Clark was a very good friend by then, but Colin Chapman and Jim Clark were like husband and wife. And there was none of the drivers in the team with Jim Clark that seemed to get anywhere. There were good drivers, but Jim Clark was so good that he was the number one. So I went with BRM. I had a very nice relationship with them, wonderful company. Graham Hill was terrific. He taught me all the things I needed to learn. And I won the Grand Prix of Italy that year. And I think I've won third in the World Championship in my first year, which was for me pretty important. So it was a rocket ship. It took off very quickly.
Your arrival to Formula One was very cautious.
Because I was a racing driver, it was a funny thing. But because I was a shooting man before racing, I learned a lot about mind management. In shooting, if you miss a target because you're too nervous at the beginning of a big event, you never get the target back. It's always going to be 99 out of 100 or whatever. In motor racing, you can make little mistakes and you can catch them up in the next corner or the next 5 corners. So my shooting had a lot to do with, I think, the success I got early in my life. Unlike most young drivers, they overdrive to begin with. And having had another sport, and when you made a mistake in the other sport, you never got it back, I think that was a big contributor to any success that I was later to have. BRM were a wonderful company for me to be with, but after my first year, they changed the formula, and the new big-engined BRM was simply too heavy. It carried too much fuel and oil, more than the Queen Mary. It was so heavy. So therefore, I didn't win a race that year in Formula One. I was quite successful in Formula Two by then. And by then I was doing touring car racing and GT racing, and I was being picked up by other people. I also went to Indianapolis because that's where the big money was. So my rise was fairly fast. But I think because of my previous experience in another sport, which I was good at, I learned a lot from that before, like most young drivers, have a period where they make mistakes or they have little accidents or they go off the road. In my case, I think I got rid of that in my other sport, in shooting. So my career was a very nice one because I was always with good people. And Ken Tyrrell was a fantastic man because he picked me up in Formula 3, then Formula 2, and then eventually in Formula 1. So the engineers he chose were the best, which meant that I didn't have the mechanical failures like a lot of other drivers do. And because I was thinking a little bit about on the safety side, I didn't have the kind of accidents that a lot of other drivers had.
How was Formula One at the time? Very different from today.
Formula One has always been colourful, glamorous and exciting. It's totally global. But in those early days, I think it was rather special because it was the 60s and the 70s. The best music, all the girls were dressed better than ever before, very little clothes on. The glamour, the colour of excitement, I think was higher then than it even is now. It's wonderful today, it's better today, it's safer today than it's ever been. But although we had so many deaths and big accidents, somehow or other that provided another dimension to the sport that gladly doesn't exist today. I had a lot to do with changing safety in motorsport. The tracks were dangerous. We went from one formula to a formula that was twice the size of the first engine, a 1500 to a 2000 cc engine. And suddenly the speeds were higher, but the racetracks had not been adjusted to accommodate the higher speeds. So we had a very long period of fatalities. All my friends, I got lost in Formula One or in Formula Two because the racetracks were the same for Formula One and Formula Two. And 57 of my friends died while I was racing, which was for me ridiculous. So I became the president of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, which in those days had a lot of power, and we had to change the sport. And we closed the Nürburgring in Germany, the best racing track in the world, 187 corners per lap. But you can't manage safety for 187 corners per lap because it's both sides of the racetrack. It's medical, it's firefighting, it's just impossible. So we closed the Nürburgring and we closed Spa-Francorchamps, which again was one of the great circuits in the world. And we now have it back because they've made it safe. So safety had a lot to do with my career. It was very unpopular. I had death threats because the Eifel region of Germany's economics, a lot of it was based on the Nürburgring. And suddenly the big race, Formula One, was stopped. So I had to have help from police, etc. But it was the right thing to do. And motor racing today is probably safer than any other sport. There's more people die on falling off horses than they do in Formula One racing. So the sport has really developed. In my time, you were sitting in the cockpit of a car, sitting on the fuel tank. From below your knees to your shoulders, a fuel tank. So when you had a big accident, we had a lot of failures like that, and of course people died. Today, the cockpit of a Formula One car is like a survival cell. It's fantastic. The whole circuit now is fantastic. The medical facilities at the track are fantastic. So the sport, in many different ways, has raised itself. It's now the biggest spectator sport in the world. Bigger than soccer, bigger than American football. And it's totally global because everybody drives a car. Whether it's a Fiat or a Ferrari, they drive the car. So somehow or other, the glamour, the colour, the excitement, and to some extent the danger, because of such high speeds. We're doing more than 300 kilometres per hour. It's a very attractive sport. We now go to 23 Grand Prix in the world. In the old days, some of us went to Indianapolis because it was big money. Today, we go to 3 Grand Prix in America. One in Florida, one in Texas, and one at the end of the season in Las Vegas, as well as keeping Monaco and Monza and the British Grand Prix and the French Grand Prix and the German Grand Prix, etc. So the sport is very strong.
What was the driver's perception at the time? Were you afraid or were you into a trance and you just drive faster and then you didn't realize the danger?
I think in my time, the camaraderie amongst the drivers was better. Nowadays, the drivers have helicopters and private jets, and it's a different world. And they have very elaborate motorhomes. They're buildings, they're not motorhomes anymore. They don't have the same communication. The Grand Prix Drivers Association is still active, but it's not as powerful as it was in my day, or the days of Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Jack Brabham, Jochen Rindt, Piers Courage, etc. I think that is missing. We used to go on holiday together. Jim Clark, Jochen Rindt, Piers Courage, Helen, my wife, their wives or girlfriends. Francois Sever had more girlfriends than anybody else. But we travelled together. We holidayed together, as well as racing together. And in those days, we raced to make good money. We had to race Formula 3, touring cars, Indy cars, Can-Am race, all sorts of different formulas, because then the multinational corporations were, I think, more active. Ford Motor Company, for me, I was with 40 years with the Ford Motor Company. If I won the World Championship, they took me around the world every year, you know, from Rome to the Middle East to India, to Pakistan, to Argentina, to the whole world. That doesn't happen today. Television today does that for people, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same glamour when you were to go to Argentina, or you were to go to Brazil, or you were to go to, you always met the president of the country. You were always given dinner parties. You were always given very nice gifts. The media in each country, because it wasn't like the internet of today. It was journalists that you were meeting. Television was still, of course, strong, but not as strong as today. So I think some of that has changed. But on the other hand, the spectators are bigger. The facilities are better. The glamour, the colour, the excitement is still as strong. And we now have a paddock club with Do & Co, a lovely little Austrian catering family, do the best job in the world for the richest people in the world to go to the most expensive parts of motorsport spectating, the paddock club. And we have very good management of the sport now in a stronger way. So I think I'm very lucky that I lived in a period when it was totally different and saw each growth come my way, because I'm still with Formula One. I'm with Rolex, I'm with Heineken, because of my wife, Helen, was my timekeeper and my lap charter. That's what happened in those days. The wives or the girlfriends came to the races and had a job for timekeeping and lap charting. And Helen was very good at that. Now Helen has dementia, which is an illness. There is no cure currently. I want to change that. And we have a charity called Race Against Dementia. And Formula One supports that. So we go to Grand Prix in every corner that's Formula One, and we get financial support to buy young PhDs or young professors to find a cure for dementia. And it will happen in my lifetime. So that's the biggest challenge I've ever had. But it also has more people taking an interest in Formula One. And a lot of people who go to Formula One, because Race Against Dementia is there, they give money to us to buy new young professors and new young PhDs. So that has changed. That wasn't happening in my early days. But still, the sport is fantastic. I go to 14, 15, 16, sometime Grand Prix a year. I meet all my friends and all of the racing drivers and media still. And the media building now is a very big building because there's more media, not just for television, but for print. And the internet is more powerful today than probably anything else.
What about the driver's perception of danger at your time? Were you aware of that? Did you feel that?
The animal is the same. The racing driver of Caracciolo and Nuvolari, and way back, to the Fangios, the Sterling Mosses, to the Jim Clarks or the Jackie Stewarts or the Graham Hills, and today the Lewis Hamiltons, and that young racing driver from Holland, Verstappen, who is now hugely successful. There has always been somebody hugely successful, and that means more colour, more excitement, more spectators. But because of television and the internet, it's much more organised, it's much more understood and a bigger audience. And we have more women coming to Grand Prix. Years and years ago, a man would come in on a Friday night to see his wife and his children after work and he said, "Oh, by the way, Jean, Fred and I are going to the Grand Prix at Silverstone." The wife never got to be there. Now the whole family goes to Silverstone and the women are as numerous as the men because the women are driving cars as much as men are driving cars. So it's much broader than it's ever been before, and there's more countries more involved. The Middle East now has 2 or 3 or 4 Grand Prix in a year. Latin America's always had Argentina in the past, and Brazil, of course, and Mexico. But now we've got many more countries involved and many more multinational corporations involved because of the power of television and the internet in being able to see a colourful, glamorous and exciting sport because everyone drives a car. It's not just like soccer or it's not like other sports. It's different. There's participation and people understand it and feel it more fully because they do it every day to go to work or to go to school sometimes. Now it's so popular.
Who were the toughest opponents at your time?
The best racing driver I ever raced against was Jim Clark, another Scot and a very good friend. But sadly, he lost his life in a racing car. Graham Hill, Jack Brabham, Dan Gurney, Jochen Rindt, Piers Courage, Francois Sever, my teammate, was fantastic. I think then there was more of the real stars, maybe even than now. Although the power of television, the power of media is so much bigger today, more people know about it. But I think that in the period that I raced, there was considerably more camaraderie and somehow or other a tiny bit more glamorous. Sometimes when you see too much of some people, it takes away a little bit of the excitement. The rarity, because there wasn't the same media power, therefore the superstar was perhaps more recognisable in a way. Although today the top drivers are known around the world because of the internet and because of television, which was not there in my day. But it was a different time, it was a good time, but today is better.
Which was the best racing car you have ever driven?
The best racing car I ever drove, unfortunately, was French, not British. It was a Matra, it was a Formula One car. I won the Formula One World Championship in a Matra with a Ford engine, Cosworth Ford engine. Jean-Luc Lagardère was the head of Matra, Engine Matra, and it was a wonderful relationship that I had, and it was a beautiful car. They were doing satellite events with rocket ships, and they brought another dimension of engineering and excellence, I think, that was followed by their example. And the Matra was a beautiful car to drive. I think still the best car I ever drove. Unfortunately, they wanted to be all French. I wanted to keep the Ford Cosworth engine, so I had to excuse myself to stay with the Ford Cosworth engine. And I left Matra, which was a disappointment for me, because I loved the team, I loved the engineers, I loved Jean Lagardère was a great man, a good example. But I think it was probably the best car. The Tyrrell, that I won 2 world championships with, was more difficult to drive, but was very safe, very strong. The wheels didn't fall off. I had really a very good team of people, mechanics. And Ken Tyrrell was a wonderful manager of people. So I was very lucky. I drove for very good people.
You left in 1973 after 99 races.
It should have been 100. But at the last Grand Prix of the season in Watkins Glen, on the Saturday before the Sunday race, my teammate Francois Sever had a huge accident and was killed. And out of respect to Francois, I felt that it would not be appropriate for me to drive. And therefore, I saw the start of the race, and then Helen, my wife, and I disappeared. I still love the sport. I still go to a great many races, but I had already decided to retire at the end of that season, and we had already decided that Francois Sever should be the #1 driver, taking over from me. So it was a real tragedy. First of all, of course, losing his life. He was a very glamorous, very colourful man in every way. I mean, he went out with Brigitte Bardot, and all the girls were after him all of the time. And it was wrong for me, I think, to do my 100th Grand Prix with the death, which would have been only the day before. And I think doing 99 was, in a funny sort of way, a little different than doing 100. But the sport today I still love, and I'm still deeply involved. So I haven't lost the sport.
Do you feel satisfied from the level of safety today?
Oh, I'm satisfied in every respect to the life I've lived, which has been driven by motorsport. Formula One mostly, of course, but the other categories of the sport, Indianapolis, Can-Am championships, touring cars, GT cars, Le Mans cars, etc. So in my day, of course, we all drove those different cars. Today, the Grand Prix driver only drives Formula One. And I think that's a shame, a pity, because I think I lived in a more colourful life. Going to Indianapolis was completely different than driving in Monte Carlo. Both were fantastic, but the same applies to driving a GT car or a Le Mans car and a Formula One car and a Formula 2 car and a touring car or any other type of car. So I think it was more versatile, more glamorous, certainly more tiring. One year I did 67 crossings of the Atlantic, going from American racing to European racing, never mind Australia and New Zealand and everywhere else. It took a lot out of me. I had a duodenal ulcer that hemorrhaged. I had mononucleosis. I had to drop out of racing, lost the world championship because of it. But I wouldn't change it if I had to do it again, because it's broader. I mean, I made lots of friends in New Zealand, lots of friends in Australia, lots of friends everywhere else. Of course, that happens today, but it's in a different manner. It's not as deep, I don't think, as it was then. And probably the fact that death was an internal reality of our sport. You know, when your best friend dies and you're in the same race as he is, in those days they didn't stop the race. When Piers Courage died, or lots of other drivers died, the race continued. The cars were on fire. You were driving through the flames of the cars. That doesn't happen today. And that's, of course, a big improvement. That was wrong in those days. Now it's correct. The management of the sport is stronger, better. It's safer. There's more money. Now, a driver today in Grand Prix motor racing, the top racing drivers get paid huge amounts of money, as much as any sportswoman in the world. But it's always been like that. Way back in 1970, I think, was the first time I earned £1 million in a year. Now, of course, everything's gone up, but the values have gone up, the costs have gone up, and now a driver can earn more than £1 billion almost a year. So the sport is bigger, stronger, and better. So I don't look over my shoulder saying it was better in my day. It was wonderful in my day, but it's better today. Okay, what would you like to do? Sit over there? Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.